Was your narcissist afraid of things? See, some people are like, no, like my narcissist wasn't afraid of anything at all. And a lot of them don't have a care in the world. Like they don't care about other people. They don't care about themselves. They don't care about their own safety. They don't care about the future. They just live here and now in the moment, and they don't really care. But what I'd like to bring up to you is that narcissism is based with a lot of fear. A lot of fear that's going on underneath the surface. That fear of vulnerability, that fear of shame, that fear of guilt. And it rides and courses underneath the surface so much that it develops a very hardened exterior to the outside world. I'm going to read a quote from you from this one book that I've been going through. So when narcissism comes to church, and it says, however, the narcissistic shadow side holds shame, rage, self-doubt, inner chaos, and intense fear. The fear of not being enough, the fear of not living up to their own expectations or the expectations of others, the fear of moral or vocational failure, the fear of not being right. The shadow never goes away, is always lurking beneath, a constant reminder of the fragility the narcissist would rather not admit. In the end, threats of humiliation and shame keep the narcissist self-defended and in control. It's almost like the idea of being afraid of that vulnerability, being afraid of being honest, being afraid of acknowledging who they are, being afraid of what they struggle with, being afraid of what they deal with, being afraid of their outlook and how they interact with other people. And oftentimes that fear will build up so much, and that shame will build up so much that they'll do anything and everything to avoid it, including lying, gaslighting, manipulation, future faking, and the list goes on, that the narcissist will do anything they can to not feel guilt, to not feel shame, to not feel vulnerability, to not feel those things at all. So as a result, they will try to hide and diminish anything in their lives that they don't fear. So they don't fear the unknowns, they don't fear the other person, so they don't fear whatever it might be. But right there, the idea of like the shadow never goes away. The fear that lingers over them at times of how they're perceived, of how their images, of what control they have, of who they're controlling. All these things develop different types of fear in the narcissist that automatically push out more and more and more abuse. The thing is, you have to remember that fear, the things that's going on underneath the surface, does not justify the abuse that they're giving. Does not justify what they're doing to you. But there is a big aspect that narcissism is graded in fear. Fear of that shame. Fear of that vulnerability. It's the idea of never being able to admit that a narcissist is wrong. Never being able to admit that what they're doing is hurtful to others. I struggle with this. I still struggle with this all the time. It was just a couple of days ago, my wife did something and it turned out that I was wrong in that situation. And she asked me, she was like, so like what happened? And I explained and I was like, and she was like, oh, so like I was actually right. And I was like, yeah. And just like moved on. She was like, well, were you wrong? And I was like, I was like less right. Like you made a good call. Like I understand. And like I literally wanted to skirt around the subject as much as I could because I didn't want to actually say the words, I was wrong. Because there's that fear of inadequacy, the fear of incompetency, the fear of judgment, of what other people are going to think, the fear of failure, like whatever it might be. There's that fear of vulnerability and honesty underneath the surface that actually is like saying like, hey, don't tell anybody that you actually messed up because that messes up your fantasy of being perfect. That messes up your fantasy of who you think you are or who you think you should be when you know that that's cognitively going against. There's a dissonance between who you think you are or who you think you should be versus who you actually are on a day-to-day basis. I think narcissists have a lot of fear in their lives, but they won't show it. They'll just hide it under manipulation, gaslighting, lies, you name it.